Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us this Daniel channel. Welcome to what is the last show of the year, 31st of December, 2024. And so for our YouTube channel, English language YouTube channel, Daniel Estulin, I want to do a brief geopolitical review of what happened in 2024. It's been quite a year. We could talk not so much about the results of 2024, but also about the arrangements of different pieces on the board. And I think without a doubt, the world has become less cozy. The division into specific areas of foreign policy has become even more conditional. What is clear, the processes that are absolutely irreversible, changing the political landscape, have become visible to a naked eye and will only accelerate in 2025. And I think that's very, very good because people will finally understand what's at stake and what's going on behind the scenes. Okay, so point number one, the great game has returned to Eurasia, from Georgia to Armenia to China. It's a strikingly different from the classical version of the Anglo-Saxons versus Russia of the 19th century, because you see, the original great game pitted notably Britain, Russia, and the declining Ottoman Empire in this continual warfare against one another for control of Transcaucasia and Central Asian region. Today, it still includes Russia, but also the Anglo-Saxons, but with a clearly defined division into Britain on the one hand and the United States on the other. And then a completely new actor has entered the game, China. Also, the Turkish project of Great Turan has emerged as one of the regional poles. The Central Asian states themselves are not objects of external forces. Rather, they're working on their own tasks. And with the escalation of the global crisis, the intensity of the processes in this part of the world would only increase in 2025. Also, a unique military alliance between Russia and North Korea emerged, which immediately broke most of the West's strategy in Eastern Europe and the Far East. And so, taking into account China, it becomes possible to theorize about a kind of a pan-Eurasian military dominion, the heartland, so to speak. And the confrontation with the West became a classic conflict between land on the one hand and sea on the other. The principle of the inviolability of borders has finally collapsed. You can no longer blame Russia for this. The rapidly collapsing Syria, which was taken under control of the Turkish militants, Israel pro-American Kurds, is clear evidence that the right of the strong has become the official criterion of foreign policy. Future US President Donald Trump made territorial claims to Canada, to Panama, Denmark, through Greenland in a span of a week. On that, I'll talk more about tomorrow. And this was clearly not a joke. Ha ha, as most people thought it was just funny. No, this was not a joke. And so the transition from statesman to practice in one form or another will follow. And if the United States and Israel with Turkey can do it, in other words, break up Syria and claim its land as their own, then why not everyone else? The European Union and Europe as a whole are rapidly losing their subjectivity. And without drawing the necessary conclusions from the results of Russophobia of 2022 and 2023, the Euro elite have firmly embarked on a course of deindustrialization and economic contraction in favor of militarization and another attempt to gather coalition of the unwilling for a new campaign against Russia. You do have rare islands of common sense, Hungary and Slovakia, less noisily Austria and also partly Serbia. They are less and less connecting their interests, their national interest, with the European Union in the form in which it exists today. And so the further along we go, the more it becomes clear the fate of Europe is not being decided in Europe at all. It's being decided in Washington. And so the collapse of the last democratic illusions about elections, etc., freedom of speech, people's will, well, that's also become obvious. The cancellation of the election results in Romania, shenanigans in Moldova, the attempts at a Maidan in Georgia with the now former President Zhubarishvili, a French citizen, by the way, unwilling to leave office, President, quote unquote, Zelensky, who not only canceled the elections, but made sure there would be no credible opposition by banning any and all political parties that could put his leadership, quote unquote, in question. Le Pen is being banned in France. Likewise, Alternative for Germany. All these are phenomena of the same order. There's also a clear degradation of the Euro elite. Germany, France, and Britain, which are constantly in political crisis, their prime ministers, in plural, have become something like disposable diapers or napkins. That's an example of what we're seeing globally. And all this is a clear prologue to a radical paradigm shift when either relatively healthy forces will come to power or Europe will absolutely definitively slide into a fascist dictatorship of some kind of an insane format where former nation states will be ruled by sexual deviants with neuroses regarding ecology, Russophobia, and Bengalomania. The concept of a world policeman is a thing of the past. The Houthis in Yemen have been proving all year that if you have nothing to lose and if you're willing to die for your ideal, the West can't do anything about it. And so, having collapsed a significant share of world trade that passed through the Suez Canal, Yemen has no plans to give in. In fact, NATO tried to do something about it, but the result was zero or even negative. Iran has moved away from the previous format of Iran plus Hamas plus Hezbollah and is forming something new with a stake on diplomacy, I would say, with on one hand trying to form an alliance with the Islamic world, and with the other signaling to the United States about its readiness to negotiate. I'm afraid appeasement will turn out badly for the Ayatollahs. I hope I'm wrong. But seeing world events develop in the Middle East, unfortunately, I think I will be proven right. And so the Middle East has entered a new phase of transformation, which will obviously not be without conflict. And the triumph of Islamists in Syria hints at a restart of Arab Spring 2.0. Also, non-Western integration formats have become for almost, for the first time in history, at least as popular as Washington-centric ones. Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, Southeast Asia, they're in mass rushing to BRICS. And so the challenge for 2025 is to use this momentum for the common good. And in closing, I think you will agree this was an insane year from any vantage point. I also think that the next one will be even better. That's on the one hand. Okay, what else do I want to talk to you about? Russia. Russia will not be able to ignore the United States. Now, some Russian politicians of note are saying we're an empire, let's ignore the United States, let's just do our own thing. And so I thought about the thesis of forgive, ignore, and punish. And it's absolutely clear that weak countries are forced to submit to the will of the strong countries. They have no choice. And so the question of forgiveness lies in the plane of how much harm they managed to cause Russia. That is, there should be an evaluative, unbalanced approach, in my opinion. I'm against forgiveness. I'm totally against forgiveness. I'm totally against turning the other cheek. It's fair to pay attention to those countries that did not submit to the will of the West and develop intensive cooperation with these countries. These are going to be Russia's friends. And so, regarding ignoring the United States, a good option at first glance. But let's analyze how viable is it? Russia is not averse to ignoring, and the United States itself, it seems, will not leave us alone, at least for now. And we will not be able to pretend that nothing is happening. It is America that is waging a war against us through Ukraine. And when Ukraine is exhausted, it will wage war first through the countries of Eastern Europe and then Western Europe. And by the way, this will be, let's call it Europe's punishment for not doing enough to help Ukraine win the war. Because remember, it was the American establishment that decided to bring NATO closer to Russia's borders in the mid-1990s, not the other way around. It won't be possible to ignore the United States, because this decision has not been canceled as being implemented, and not only in the Ukrainian direction. You have to remember that all countries in the Western world are considered expendable by the Anglo-Saxon core, all of them. So what can we say about the countries of non-Western world, where America will throw everyone it can, under the Russian steamroller? And if we keep ignoring the United States, eventually we will have no choice but to throw down. Well, the question is, will Russia have enough strength to digest all of America's proxies? Ukraine, Poland, the Baltic countries, Romania, Moldova, Germany, France. And even if we do, how will we approach the eventual fight with the United States itself? Do we have a plan? I repeat, the only language the collective West understands is the language of strength and the language of death. Rain death on them and they will listen. And that's why the West despised Stalin, because they were scared shitless of what Stalin can do and did to the West. Unfortunately, Putin is no Stalin. And therefore, I think that Russia will have no choice but to choose a different strategy. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not calling for an all-out war with the United States. That'll be absolutely insane. Let me note also that the United States itself does not want it either, for the exception of a few mentally deranged senators and congressmen. But I think it's imperative that Russia must, at a minimum, take such action so that strategic nuclear deterrence can again become a force to be reckoned with, not something that the Americans laugh at. And so that one nuclear superpower could not wage war through an intermediary, through a proxy, with another nuclear superpower, because it would understand that the decision is fraught with serious consequences. Okay, so on the final note, a few random thoughts before we bid 2024 goodbye and good riddance. The scientific act of consciousness is the most primitive and also the most complex, for which there is simply no explanation. That's the act of understanding. What I'm trying to say, and I'm not being coy, it's impossible to create artificial intelligence, because intelligence is a property of the human psyche, therefore artificial intelligence is an oxymoron. The philosophy of postmodernism is vulgarly projected onto today's Western society. It has expelled logos, in other words, meaning and concepts from philosophy, and replaced it with a kind of a mythological way of knowing, and this is regression. We have reached an amazing historical point. The 500-year period of Western dominance is ending. No one has ever dominated large areas of planet Earth for more than 500 years. Magnificent theories explaining historical development do not fit together. And the most important thing is that a person makes history based on the motivations that are at the center of his consciousness, both individual and also social. With everything we're seeing around us, I think it's important to understand when we speak of trust. He who betrays his own people will betray others even faster. The black sun that Ukrainians tattoo on their bodies is a terrible symbolism in metaphysics. He who seeks death, who is fixated on it, will die. He who tries to recreate a soul will miserably fail. Speaking of artificial intelligence, a person cannot be defined because a person is not a scalar value. We are constantly transforming into something else. And so the Russian person believes in the fact that a person can survive a transformation more than anyone else. As soon as a person placed himself in the center of consciousness, he began to understand what kind of people there are. And it turned out that there is a subhuman and there is also a superhuman. And all these floodgates were opened by the liberal banking financiers. Another thing to keep in mind is that there is no hero in the postmodern world. A Superman is not a hero. He's a robot. The Western civilization has nothing left in its core meaning except for thirst for power. And thus their death is near, and they know it. And nothing they do can change the predetermined course of action. In Central Asia, Austria, Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, partly Croatia and Serbia, These countries do not want to fall into the zone of chaos and are ready to accept any ultimatum that Moscow will issue to become part of their area of influence. Now, if Donald Trump lives to become president, and it's a big if, he will absolutely definitively start negotiations with the Russians, because Ukraine today is property of transnational corporations. And Trump represents a different global project. Now, the upkeep on Ukraine is prohibitively expensive, and transnational corporations do not want to let the military-industrial complex earn money, which in fact does not have enough resources, and which is 40% dependent on supplies from China. Now, the United States will absolutely strangle China economically, and so China, if they want to survive, will have no choice but to join forces with Russia on equal terms. Not like now, with China taking enormous economic advantage of Russia's geopolitical situation, especially through natural resources, but it will have to be on equal footing, otherwise China will be destroyed economically. Part of Europe will end up, I'd say, affiliated with Russia's area of influence, and this will absolutely lead to a serious bloodshed, because today's elite from the 1990s have no language to explain anything into the future, have no idea what the world is going to look like, and they will try at all costs to make sure that nothing changes. The status quo no longer is feasible, and so there's going to be bloodshed. And finally, for Russia to survive, it needs a gradual but serious rotation of the stagnant elite. On that, we end. Merry Christmas to all of you. Happy New Year's. Let 2025 be the best year of our lives. I'm Daniel Estulin. Please join our channel. It's free, YouTube, and also our webpage, estulin.media, for amazing private content for subscribers. Thanks, and see you tomorrow. Goodbye.